Welcome back, everyone. We have a story today coming out of the Wall Street Journal concerning the situation developing within Venezuela. Venezuela has recently held elections in which Juan Guaido was seen as the opposition leader-elect, and the current President Moreno refused to step down or release power. Most countries and the opposition within the country itself consider Moreno to have rigged the elections in order to elect himself once again. The country has fallen into steep economic decline since his assumption of power roughly 6 years ago, and shows no signs of turning the situation around. The article itself is interesting for several reasons as we go through looking at how Washington is handling the situation, having recognized him as the official leader of the country and having turned over the control and access to American funds within the country. This is the typical transition of power recognized by other states, and America has encouraged other countries within the European Union to follow suit. So Trump administered imposed sanctions on Venezuela as well concerning their state-oiled company, the PDVSA, and froze the country's oil assets within the U.S. The entire reason for the crisis having had occurred was that Moreno, when assuming power, had collectivized the oil industry, which supported the Venezuelan economy. As time went on and America developed fracking processes to support its own oil industry, the price of oil plummeted, and Venezuela, having no backup support or other systems of economy, their entire nation was dependent upon that oil, and as the price dropped, the nation dropped with it. The rest of the article focuses on the dealings of Washington with the Venezuelan president-elect, Mr. Guaido, who was briefly arrested earlier this month and responded Tuesday saying that he was working to protect Venezuelan state assets from looting by corrupt officials. The White House National Security Advisor John Bolton denounced the investigation against Mr. Guaido, and interesting note in looking at these articles, John Bolton was seen earlier today carrying a legal pad which had scrawled across it, "Military troops in Venezuela." The speculation has occurred as to whether or not America will likely become involved in Venezuela, given the current developments in the situation of political power being opposed by Moreno to give up or transition to the president-elect, and the background of which this is occurring, an economic devastation of the country, brings to mind similar other events in other countries like Germany, in which a economic depression was followed by a transition, a turbulent time in political process. Mr. Moreno has overseen an economic collapse in Venezuela during the 6 years of power that has led to hyperinflation, shortages of basic medicine, and widespread hunger. And we will touch on this in looking at some of the data for comparison. The US dollar to the Venezuelan bolivar currently stands at 1 to $248,488. This is a enormous amount of hyperinflation. As we can see over time, this having increased drastically as the price of oil fell. Now, to fully appreciate exactly how bad this situation is, we can take a look at these individuals within a field of Venezuela scavenging for food by going out to a local field with cows, taking rocks, and then bashing the cows to death in order to eat them. Now, I won't show the full video, but you get the general idea. This was several months ago when economic situation was considerably better than it is now. As this crisis has continued to develop, there are sightings of individuals stir diving in order to feed themselves, and worse, Daily Mail has released information concerning the situation in Venezuela as late as October 25th of last year, and that women were going to other countries in order to prostitute themselves to feed their families back at home. These were not the typical human trafficking that you would expect. These were middle class individuals who held positions as lawyers and doctors within their country. So the entire situation is extremely concerning, to say the least, and having a military option on the table, I do see it as a possibility of coming to fruition. When you have a scenario in which a despot is refusing to surrender power and has presided over what can charitably be called a catastrophe of his national interests, I don't see it becoming likely for him to just walk away or change his mind at a later date. There have been rumors also within the military of Venezuela, certain generals voicing support for this opposition president-elect, and if that is not carried as a popular consensus throughout the military to handle the transition of power, there will likely resolve in a violent and military conflict. Other countries are likely to get involved just due solely to, if nothing else, their own self-interest. Venezuela has large deposits of oil resources, I believe the collection of the largest in the world, and so there is enormous interest across the international community to have a stable economy and functioning oil industry within Venezuela. And being one of its closest neighbors here in America and largest consumers, I would highly expect us to desire to exert some stabilizing effect within that region. The economy of Venezuela being what it is, I don't expect there to be much of a war per se, should that come to that, and I honestly don't even expect a direct all-out confrontation, militarily speaking. I think it's more likely that we would insert operatives or to send down trainers in order to operate as a coaching or mentoring a domestic revolution, as we saw in Afghanistan and Iraq prior to our military insertion there. And so looking at this from the perspective of how this will develop, sending down enormous amounts of troops, not likely to happen. However, if the option is to go with some sort of training or boots on the ground expertise guiding rebels in the area, this could also have significant blowback, as we've seen in the past with prior CIA operative functioning within Latin American countries that are still spoken about today from the Cold War era. Regardless of how this turns out, the humanitarian crisis that has spiraled out of control is truly heartbreaking to see the effects of, looking at it from the perspective of an American sitting thousands of miles away. And how we come forward from this without tragic loss of human life is near impossible at this point, I believe. And how Venezuela as a country reestablish and rebuilds itself from here is also yet to be determined. I don't know, and would be interested in finding out exactly how the people within the country view the socialist policies that have been enacted and have led to these results. If there is not a rejection of that ideology and those choices, I can't see a means or way in which to stabilize the country without having the same conclusion 5-6 years again from now. And I don't see it within the national interest of America to try to pursue that route unless control or military presence is established long term in that country. But that's all speculation. Just wanted to give an update as far as what the Wall Street Journal was reporting. If you guys have any thoughts or comments to contribute, by all means please do. Please click the like button, it helps extraordinarily, and hit the subscribe button if you'd like to see future videos. Thank you, and have a good night.